She was quietly mopping the lobby floor when the CEO suddenly froze, hearing her speak Mandarin, Spanish, and French fluently like a native speaker. What happened next shook the whole company. Most employees never really noticed the cleaning. Staff at Halberg International, not out of disrespect, but because they always worked in the background, pushing carts, emptying trash, wiping tables late into the night like unnoticed background noise. It was another crisp, bustling Monday morning in the heart of the city. The sleek glass building of Global Tech Dynamics towered over the streets, its modern design reflecting the rising sun as commuters hurried past. Inside the lobby, the usual rhythm of a workday was already in full swing. Footsteps echoed across the polished floors, mingling with the buzz of conversations and the low hum of phones being tapped and coffee cups being clutched like lifelines. The air was thick with the urgency of deadlines, and employees moved swiftly, eyes glued to their screens, their minds already several steps ahead. Marcus Donovan, the company's CEO, navigated his usual route from the parking garage to the executive suite on the 22nd floor. His steps were purposeful, a routine he had followed for years. As he walked, his mind was already on the upcoming meetings and strategies he needed to address, the pressure of growing the company weighing on him like it always did. His black leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the cool, smooth tiles of the lobby, and the world around him seemed to blend into a blur of people, phones, and fleeting conversations. The noise faded as he focused on his thoughts, the familiar hustle of the office offering little more than background noise to his determined pace. As Marcus approached the elevator banks, his steps faltered. Her voice pierced through the usual office clamor, cutting through the noise in a way that grabbed his attention. It was the unmistakable cadence of Mandarin, fluid and precise, effortlessly navigating a conversation about the building's layout. Marcus froze for a moment, his brow furrowing. He hadn't expected to hear Mandarin, not in a lobby like this, not in the bustling, impersonal office space where only a few were fluent in anything beyond English. The voice wasn't coming from one of the sales reps or any of the executives he'd expect to hear in such a conversation. It was coming from a woman dressed plainly in a dark blue janitor's uniform, her hair neatly pulled back into a ponytail. Her words flowed seamlessly, and before Marcus could fully process the situation, she switched languages with the same ease: Spanish, French, and then back to Mandarin. Each conversation was a bridge, connecting her to people, solving problems with a few words that brought clarity and understanding to visitors from different corners of the globe. He stood still, watching as Mira Ellis, the quiet janitor he'd seen countless times before, navigated these languages with a grace that was almost hypnotic. As she spoke with an older man about directions to the elevators in Spanish, Marcus's mind struggled to catch up. But it wasn't just these few languages that left him slack-jawed. Mira spoke fluently in over a dozen languages. He could hear her switching between Portuguese, Italian, and even Arabic without breaking a sweat. It was overwhelming, but the true depth of her skills hit him as she smoothly addressed a delivery man in German, confirming the shipment's location. It was like watching a symphony play, but the instruments were words, and Mira was conducting the entire orchestra. Each language was another thread in the intricate tapestry she wove through the buildings. Operations. Marcus watched almost in disbelief as Mira moved between languages with the kind of ease that most people couldn't manage in a lifetime. What stopped him in his tracks, though, was when she looked at him, catching his gaze for the first time. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with the hint of a smile. It was then that Marcus understood just how little he knew about the woman he'd passed by hundreds of times. A janitor who, it turned out, had a command of 90 languages. Marcus took a slow step forward, his curiosity overwhelming him now. He had to know more. The voice he had just heard, the ease with which Mira moved between languages, was nothing short of extraordinary. He had to confirm what he had witnessed. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice barely a whisper as he approached her. Mira turned to face him, her expression calm and composed. The confidence she carried in her speech translated into a quiet dignity in her demeanor. But there was no pride in her eyes, no sign of arrogance, just a simple, matter-of-fact look, as though speaking in multiple languages was as ordinary to her as taking a breath. "That was Mandarin, right?" Marcus asked, carefully choosing his words. He watched her for a brief moment, searching for any trace of vanity, but found none. "Yes, sir," Mira answered, her tone warm and without hesitation. She then added, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili, and a few others. "I also know Latin, but I don't really count that." 90 languages. The words hung in the air between them. Mira spoke them without any sign of struggle, as though it was a routine skill, a part of her everyday life. Marcus stood there, still trying to process her response. He was at a loss for words, astonished that such talent was so easily dismissed, so effortlessly hidden behind the uniform she wore. "Your name is Mira Ellis, right?" Marcus asked, his voice a little less sure than usual. "Yes, sir," she replied with a slight nod. For a brief moment, Marcus didn't speak, just stood there, absorbing the weight of what he had just learned. Mira Ellis, the janitor who quietly moved through the halls after hours, was one of the most linguistically gifted people he had ever encountered. Unable to resist, he asked, "Can I speak to you in my office for a few minutes? I'm, curious. How does someone like you end up cleaning floors in a building like this?" Mira's eyes flickered for a brief second, not with surprise, but with the kind of hesitation someone gets when they're used to being ignored or underestimated. She regarded him silently for a moment before nodding. "All right." As the two walked to the elevator, the atmosphere was filled with a quiet tension. Mira, so reserved, and Marcus, still reeling from the revelation, shared a brief but knowing silence. As the doors closed, Marcus pressed the button for the executive floor, his mind buzzing with questions. What had brought Mira here? How had someone with such remarkable skills ended up in a job that seemed so beneath her? When the elevator pinged softly, Marcus led her out, his mind still racing as he made his way to his office. This conversation was just the beginning, but already he knew it was going to change everything. Once they were seated in the executive suite, Mira leaned back in the chair opposite Marcus, her posture composed, her hands folded in her lap. The room was modern and sleek, a stark contrast to the dim, utilitarian spaces Mira had spent her nights in. The scent of polished wood and citrus filled the air, but it wasn't the luxury of the space that kept her attention. She was focused on the conversation, her mind a little more distant than it appeared. Marcus watched her carefully, waiting for her to begin. For a moment, Mira didn't speak, as though choosing her words with care. Then, in a voice steady and unwavering, she began her story. "I was raised in Springfield, Illinois," Mira said, her eyes glancing briefly out the window. "My parents weren't rich, not even close. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked as a nurse's aide. They didn't have much, but they pushed education like it was the only thing that mattered. It was the one thing they could give me. Her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, as though the hardships she spoke of were simply pieces of her past she had long come to terms with. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was just telling the truth. "I managed to earn scholarships to study linguistics," Mira continued, her gaze focused now on Marcus, a quiet pride in her eyes. "I was good at it, naturally. Languages were like puzzles to me. I loved how each one had its own rhythm, its own way of thinking. I was halfway through my master's when everything fell apart." Marcus leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift in tone but offering no interruption. "My mom got sick, really sick, and my dad, he had a stroke 6 months later. I dropped everything, came home to care for them both. After they were gone, it felt like everything I worked for just disappeared. I had a baby to take care of, no money, and no partner who stuck around." Her voice didn't waver, but Marcus could hear the weight of those words. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a quiet acceptance of the life she had been handed. Mira took a small breath, then continued. "So I worked wherever I could. Grocery stores, nursing homes, temp jobs, whatever paid the bills. Eventually, a janitorial supervisor here offered me night hours. It was a job with steady pay, and it gave me the time to pick up my daughter from school and keep a roof over our heads. Marcus nodded, processing her words. There was no self-pity, no longing for what could have been. Mira's tone remained neutral, steady, as she recounted the events that had shaped her. "I never stopped learning languages, though," Mira added, her voice firm with conviction. "I kept studying on my own, borrowing textbooks, listening to recordings, reading newspapers in whatever languages I could. It was the only thing that made me feel like I still had a purpose. The only thing that it kept me from feeling invisible." The words lingered in the air, but Mira's expression didn't change. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was merely stating the truth of her life's twists and turns. Marcus sat quietly, watching her with a new understanding. For all the languages she spoke, Mira's story was told in a language of its own, resilience. She wasn't defined by the circumstances she'd faced, but by how she carried on in spite of them. "I know people didn't expect much from me," Mira added, almost as an afterthought. "They saw the uniform and assumed, well, they assumed." Her voice trailed off, and for the first time, Marcus could see a faint flicker of something in her eyes, not sadness, but a quiet acknowledgement of the judgments she'd faced. He could feel the weight of those unspoken assumptions hanging. Between them, he let her words sink in. The woman sitting in front of him was not just a janitor, not just someone cleaning floors. She was someone who had faced adversity and had come out on the other side with more than just survival. She had retained a piece of her soul, one that refused to be defined by the circumstances that tried to break her. Mira met his gaze once, more steady and unwavering. "That's my story," she said simply, and in that moment, Marcus realized something fundamental. It wasn't just her linguistic skills that made her extraordinary. It was the strength she had shown in the face of life's cruelest blows. And now, sitting across from him, Mira Ellis was far more than just a janitor. She was someone who had quietly and without fanfare become more than the world ever expected her to be. Marcus sat back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping against the smooth wood of his desk. His mind raced, trying to process everything Mira had just shared. As she spoke, he had listened intently, but now, as her words settled in the quiet of the room, he found himself reflecting on the stark contrast between what he had just heard and what he had always believed. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was Mira Ellis, a woman with the kind of linguistic talent that could open doors to countless opportunities. Yet for the past 13 years, she had been working behind the scenes, quietly mopping floors and going unnoticed. All of that potential, all of that skill hidden in plain sight. He felt a pang of guilt ripple through him. How many times had he and his team sat in meetings, discussing recruitment strategies and global talent acquisition? How many times had he poured resources into hiring external consultants, translators, and contractors for projects, thinking that talent could only be found outside his own building? He had focused so much on expanding the company globally, recruiting from top-tier universities and prestigious firms, all the while overlooking the wealth of untapped potential that had been right under his nose. Mira had been here all along, quietly contributing, her skills and intelligence never even considered. Marcus's gaze drifted toward the window where the city sprawled below, a sprawling landscape filled with ambition, opportunities, and people striving to make their mark. Yet here, in his own company, there was a woman whose brilliance had gone unnoticed because she didn't fit the typical mold. He had prided himself on building global tech dynamics into an international powerhouse, making the bold moves, pushing boundaries, and seeking out the best talent from around the world. But the truth hit him hard. In his quest to bring in talent from the outside, he had failed to see what was right in front of him. The realization made him uneasy. There was a moment of discomfort, a tightening in his chest, as he thought about All the others who, like Mira, had slipped through the cracks, brilliant individuals whose worth wasn't immediately obvious, whose value couldn't be measured in degrees or polished resumes. He had missed them, all of them. Marcus couldn't help but wonder how many other hidden gems there were within his company, quietly going about their work, not because they lacked ambition or drive, but because no one had bothered to look deeper. The thought was unsettling, almost suffocating, but he couldn't ignore it. As he met Mira's gaze again, a new sense of urgency began to grow within him. This wasn't just about Mira, it was about everyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. It was about creating a space where talent could be recognized, no matter where it came from. His mind shifted gears, already formulating ideas, plans, and strategies. He had been blind to the opportunities sitting right under his nose, but that could change. It had to change, and it was going to start now. The office around him seemed quieter now, the hum of the city and the sound of Mira's calm, steady voice lingering in his thoughts. Marcus Donovan wasn't just looking at the future of global tech anymore. He was seeing the future of how talent would be recognized, and Mira Ellis had just shown him the way. The day after their conversation, Marcus found himself faced with a problem that seemed almost routine, yet today it felt different. A delegation from the company's Brazilian office was set to arrive early for a critical negotiation. The meeting was crucial. There were millions on the table, deals to be finalized, contracts to be signed. Everything needed to go smoothly. But as luck would have it, the company's hired interpreter had just cancelled last minute due to an emergency. Panic flared in Marcus's chest as he realized the impact this could have on the meeting. Without a translator, the entire negotiation could falter. The tension in the air seemed to grow thicker by the minute. As he stood in the conference room, trying to recalibrate, his mind kept drifting back to Mira, the woman who had spoken fluently, in 9 languages the day before, who had bridged gaps with a calmness that was almost eerie in its precision. Without hesitation, Marcus made a decision. He knew he was taking a gamble, but something told him it was the right choice. He picked up the phone and dialed the number to the janitorial office. "Mira," Marcus asked when she answered. "I know this is unusual, but there's an urgent situation. Can you help with a meeting? It's a delegation from Brazil, and our interpreter cancelled last minute. Can you assist?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "You want me to help with an international negotiation?" Mira's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the hint of surprise. "Yes," he said, confident but with a trace of uncertainty. "I've seen you handle multiple languages effortlessly, and I need someone who can bridge cultural gaps and smooth over this meeting." Mira hesitated only a moment longer. "I'll be there," she replied, her voice calm. Moments later, Mira walked into the conference room. The delegation, consisting of 5 executives from Brazil, was seated, their expressions a mix of curiosity and confusion. Mira, in her simple uniform, stepped into the room with the same quiet confidence she had exuded the day before. The group looked her over with a raised brow, unsure of what to expect. Marcus stood near the door, watching her every move. Mira didn't wait for a formal introduction. Without a word, she began speaking in flawless Portuguese, greeting the Brazilian executives and making small talk that immediately relaxed the atmosphere. She effortlessly navigated their accents, their colloquialisms, making them feel seen, heard, and understood. It was clear from the first few moments that Mira wasn't just translating words, she was connecting cultures. She bridged the gap with the kind of ease that Marcus had only dreamed of finding in a professional interpreter. As the meeting progressed, Mira switched between Portuguese, English, and French, translating complex terms, explaining logistical concerns, and even diffusing the rare moment of tension with a well-timed joke in their native tongue. Her ability to understand not only the words, but the cultural nuances behind them was invaluable. The Brazilian team, was visibly at ease, laughing at her anecdotes, nodding along in agreement, and responding with a level of openness Marcus had never seen before in such high-stakes negotiations. By the end of the session, it was clear that the delegation had shifted from skepticism to genuine admiration. As they stood to leave, one of the Brazilian executives, a sharp, no-nonsense man, turned to Marcus and said, "She's better than anyone we've worked with this year. Where did you find her?" Marcus smiled, the answer coming to him effortlessly. "Right here." Mira, who had been standing quietly by the door, glanced up at Marcus with a small, knowing smile. She had done what most would have thought impossible. With nothing but her knowledge, her humility, and her incredible skill, she had not only salvaged a critical meeting, but made it one of the most successful the company had ever had. As the delegates filed out, praising Mira for her contribution, Marcus knew something had shifted, not just for Mira, but for the company as a whole. It wasn't just about a language barrier anymore. It was about opportunity. It was about recognizing talent where others had missed it, and it was clear now, Mira Ellis wasn't just a janitor. She was the company's greatest asset, a woman who had quietly been waiting for her moment to make a difference, and now that moment had arrived. The day after the successful meeting with the Brazilian delegation, Marcus sat in his office, mulling over the events that had unfolded. Mira's performance had exceeded his expectations. Not only had she facilitated a crucial negotiation, but she had done so with a grace and expertise that had left the entire room in awe. There was no longer any question in his mind. Mira Ellis was not just a janitor. She was a force to be reckoned with. He could no longer ignore the talent sitting in front of him. The ability to speak 90 languages, the ease with which she connected with people from all over the world, it was too valuable to waste. Mira was exactly what the company needed. Someone who understood the nuances of global communication, someone who could navigate both the language and cultural differences that often tripped up even the most seasoned executives. Marcus knew what he had to do. He picked up the phone and dialed the janitorial office once more. "Mira, do you have a minute to meet with me?" Marcus's voice was steady, but there was a quiet urgency to it. "I'll be up in a few," she replied without hesitation. Within minutes, Mira was back in his office. She looked the same as she always did, calm, composed, with that same modest smile on her face. But today, Marcus knew the conversation would be different. He had something important to say. When she entered, Marcus gestured to the chair across from him, motioning for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice deliberate. "What you did in that meeting was incredible. The way you handled the translation, the way you connected with the team from Brazil, it was everything we need here at Global Tech. I'm sure you've noticed, we don't always handle these international meetings as smoothly as we should." Mira sat back in her chair, her eyes steady but curious. "What are you getting at, Marcus?" Marcus took a deep breath, leaning forward. "I've created a new position for you, Global Communications Liaison. It's a role designed to leverage your unique skills. You'll be handling international negotiations, overseeing our global communications, managing cultural logistics, and making sure we don't miss opportunities because of language barriers. You'll be our bridge to the world." The words hung in the air for a moment, but Mira's face remained unreadable. She was quiet, digesting what he had just said. It was a lot to take in, especially considering where she had come from. For a long time she had been content with the work she was doing, despite the underlying knowledge that she was capable of so much more. But this was a leap, a huge one. "I don't know," Mira said slowly, her voice uncertain. "It's a big step, Marcus. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that. And there's the whole cultural shift to think about. I've been working the night shift for years, and now you want me to step into a corporate role, one where people expect, well, a certain kind of presence. And wardrobe changes, too. I don't even know if I'd fit in." Marcus smiled, understanding her hesitation. He had expected this. "I get it, Mira. This is a big change, But I want you to know I'm not looking for some polished corporate image. I'm looking for results. You've already shown you can handle high-level international affairs. You've proven you don't need formal credentials to make a real impact. And as for fitting in, we're not looking for someone who fits a mold. We're looking for someone who brings something different, something we're missing. You've already shown you have the skills, the experience, and the heart to make this work. Mira met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and curiosity. She wasn't accustomed to people offering her opportunities like this, especially in a setting like global tech. She had worked hard, yes, but she had always done so in the shadows, never expecting recognition. "Why me, though?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with the skepticism that had carried her through many years of underappreciation. "Why not someone who's been in the company longer? Someone with the credentials?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression sincere. "Because you've been here all along, Mira. You've been working quietly, doing your job with excellence. You've learned the languages, the cultures, the intricacies of communication all on your own. You didn't wait for someone to hand you the opportunity. You took it upon yourself to learn, to adapt, and to thrive. That's the kind of person we need. Someone who doesn't wait for permission but just gets it done." Mira's gaze softened slightly, and she took a moment to reflect on his words. She had spent years keeping her abilities hidden, focusing on surviving, on providing for her daughter. She had never considered that someone might see her for what she truly was, an asset. "A brilliant one. I've never had an office job before," she said, her voice low. "I've never had a title." Marcus nodded. "You will learn quickly, and as for the wardrobe, we'll make sure you're taken care of. You won't be alone." In this, there was a long pause, the silence hanging between them like a tangible weight. Mira felt a mix of excitement and apprehension, but more than anything, she felt a sense of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. This wasn't just recognition for her. This was a fresh start. A chance to step into a role she had never imagined for herself, but now saw as something she deserved. After a few moments, Mira finally spoke. "All right, let's do it." Marcus smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. He knew this was the right decision for both the company and for Mira. "Welcome to Global Communications, Mira Ellis," he said, his tone firm with the weight of the moment. "We're lucky to have you." As Mira stood and left his office, there was a slight change in her step, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The shift wasn't just professional, it was personal. She wasn't just stepping into a new role, she was stepping into her own future. By the end of the day, the news of Mira Ellis's promotion had spread through the office like wildfire. It didn't take long for the whispers to start, bouncing from one corner of the building to the next. At first, it was just curiosity. Who was this janitor turned global liaison? But soon, the buzz grew louder, taking on a life of its own. In the break room, a group of employees gathered around the coffee machine, the air thick with murmurs. "Did you hear?" one of them said, lowering his voice. "Mira Ellis, the janitor, she's been promoted. She's taking over all the international negotiations now." "No way," another replied, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But she doesn't have any formal education, right? How could they just hand her a position like that?" "She must have some sort of connections," came the response. "I mean, how do you go from cleaning the floors to a global communications role overnight? That's got to be more than just speaking a few languages." The skepticism was palpable, though some voices joined in praise. "Honestly, I don't care how she got it," one employee said, glancing over at the door where Mira had just walked past. "She's amazing. I watched her translate during that Brazil meeting. She made us look good. I wouldn't mind having her on my team." Still, for every positive comment, there was another laced with doubt. "She's got the skills, but does she have the leadership experience? What kind of training has she had? All I know is she's been mopping floors for years. What's going to happen when she gets in front of the board?" Mira, meanwhile, kept her head down and focused on her work. She had already heard the whispers. And the subtle glances as she passed by colleagues in the hallways. The skepticism wasn't new. She had faced judgment for years, simply because of the uniform she wore and the life she had led. But now, it felt different. She was no longer just the janitor. She was a cultural liaison with real responsibilities, and that shift in perception made her both a target and a symbol. She sensed the undercurrent of envy, the low murmur of resentment from those who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, wondering how Mira, with no college degree, had leapfrogged so quickly into a position of power. It didn't help that some of her peers, particularly those from the upper management, had grown increasingly quiet whenever she entered a room. Their sideways glances and hushed conversations stung more than she liked to admit. But Mira had been through worse. This was nothing new. Her focus remained unwavering. She threw herself into her new role with determination, attending meetings with international teams, handling communications with clients from across the globe. She learned the technical aspects of her job on the fly, quickly grasping everything that came her way. But despite her success, the whispering didn't stop. There were days when she couldn't shake the feeling that she was under a magnifying glass, every decision, every word being scrutinized. She could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her, but she refused to let it deter her. If anything, it made her work harder. She passed by the executive office one afternoon, catching a glimpse of some of her colleagues huddled together, their voices dipping lower as she walked by. Mira didn't react. She had learned long ago that people's opinions, especially when rooted in envy, were often loudest when they were unfounded. Instead, she stepped into her office, closed the door behind her, and sat down. She had a job to do. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to herself that she belonged. And with each successful negotiation, every email she sent that solved a problem. Every conversation that bridged a gap between cultures, she knew she was doing just that. The world outside might have its doubts, but inside, Mira Ellis was already proving her worth, and that was all that mattered. Mira's first few weeks in her new role were nothing short of transformative, not just for her, but for the company. She dove headfirst into the complexities of international projects, contracts, and client relationships with a calm determination that left no room for doubt. From managing delicate negotiations with partners in Germany to smoothing over miscommunications with vendors in Japan, Mira handled it all with a grace that only someone of her caliber could possess. The intricacies of cross-cultural business were no longer a barrier, but a bridge, and Mira had the key. Her ability to not only translate languages, but to understand the subtle cultural nuances behind every word, made her an irreplaceable asset. She didn't just communicate, she connected. She transformed tense situations into productive, collaborative discussions. When a misinterpreted email almost derailed a deal with a French firm, Mira stepped in, using her knowledge of both the language and the local business customs to salvage the agreement and ensure the partnership stayed on track. Her success wasn't just in the language she spoke, but in the confidence and professionalism she exuded, qualities that were impossible to ignore. Mira brought a refreshing approach to problem-solving, often identifying issues before they became crises. Her work was impeccable, and her results were tangible. Sales teams that had struggled to break into certain markets suddenly saw more engagement and trust from international clients. Contracts that had been stalled for months were signed within days, thanks to her ability to cut through the red tape with precision. Even Marcus, who had known from the start that Mira was special, began to see the depth of her impact. He had been worried at first about how she would transition into this high-profile role, but he quickly realized that her humility and quiet intelligence were her greatest strengths. Mira didn't need to be the loudest in the room to be heard. Her actions spoke volumes. As her success became undeniable, Marcus made it a point to personally support Mira's growth. He offered mentorship, sitting down with her after key meetings to provide guidance on navigating the corporate landscape. He didn't just see her as an employee, he saw her as a leader in the making, and he wanted to help her grow into that role, making sure she had the tools, resources, and confidence she needed to succeed. Marcus watched her with a growing sense of pride. She was proving, not just to him, but to the entire company, that talent wasn't always defined by degrees or pedigrees. Sometimes it was about resilience, resourcefulness, and the willingness to take risks and make the most of every opportunity. As Mira continued to shine in her new role, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Not only had he found a solution to a long-standing issue in the company, but he had discovered an extraordinary individual who would change the company's future for the better. Mira was no longer just the janitor. She was a key player in the company's success, proving that sometimes the best talent is the one you least expect. One quiet afternoon, as Mira sat in her new office, a sense of calm washed over her. The room was modest, a simple desk, a plant on the windowsill, and a computer that she still wasn't fully accustomed to. The walls, a soft, neutral shade, felt far removed from the stark, utilitarian spaces she had spent so many years in. The contrast was striking. The chair she now sat in was plush and professional, not the hard plastic one she had known for so long. But it wasn't the office itself that mattered to her. It was the journey that had brought her here, a journey she had never allowed herself to fully reflect on until now. She opened the drawer of her desk, pulling out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. It was her old janitor badge, the same badge she had worn night after night as she quietly moved through the building, a nameless figure in the shadows of global tech. Holding it in her hand now, she could feel the weight of the years it represented. Years of silence, of overlooked potential, of being invisible to those around her. But as she looked at the badge, she didn't feel regret or bitterness. Instead, there was a deep sense of pride. This badge, this simple piece of plastic, symbolized something far greater: resilience. It was a reminder of how far she had come, of the strength it had taken to keep going despite the odds, to keep learning, to keep striving for something better when the world seemed indifferent. Mira placed the badge carefully in the drawer, not as a sign of leaving it behind, but as a symbol of what it had taught her. It was a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had earned her place in this new world, and she wasn't going to forget how she had fought for it. Looking around the room, Mira felt a surge of gratitude. The space felt unfamiliar, yes, but it also felt like a blank canvas, a world of new possibilities just waiting for her to explore. She had been given a chance, not just by Marcus, but by herself, to redefine who she was. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Mira was no longer just a woman in a uniform. She was someone who had built herself up, who had faced adversity with unwavering determination and emerged stronger for it. This office, this role, was a reflection of that transformation, a testament to the power of persistence and self-belief. For the first time in a long while, Mira allowed herself to feel the weight of how far she had come. The battles she had fought were still there, etched into her memory, but they no longer held her back. The future ahead was full of opportunity, and Mira was ready to step into it, knowing she had everything it took to succeed. The door to her office was open now, and Mira stood up, taking one last look at the badge in the drawer. With a deep breath, she closed it, locking away the past and turning her attention to the work ahead. The world was different now, and so was she. A few weeks after Mira's promotion, a small, unassuming plaque appeared on the door of one of the company's most prominent conference rooms. It wasn't part of any grand announcement, nor did it come with a lavish ceremony. Yet in its understated simplicity, it marked a pivotal moment for Mira and for global tech dynamics as a whole. The plaque read simply, "The Mira Ellis Conference Room." Mira stood before it one quiet morning, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a small gesture, But to her, it represented more than just a room named after her. It was a symbol of the cultural shift that had taken place, a shift that acknowledged talent beyond titles, beyond expectations, and beyond the traditional corporate structure. It was a recognition of her contributions, her hard work, and her undeniable impact on the company. The plaque didn't just honor Mira as an individual. It acknowledged the company's evolving understanding of what it meant to value diversity, resilience, and lived experience. It was a quiet but powerful message. The old ways of thinking, where success was defined by degrees, titles, and polished resumes, were being replaced by a new paradigm, one where results, connections, and authenticity mattered more than anything else. But the recognition didn't stop at the plaque. Mira's work began to garner international praise, especially from the company's global partners, who quickly came to rely on her insight and expertise. In meetings with clients from across the globe, from Europe to the Middle East, from South America to Asia, Mira's ability to bridge cultural and linguistic gaps became invaluable. She didn't just translate words, she translated trust, her understanding of cultural nuances, her empathy, and her ability to connect with people in a way that went beyond language were qualities that set her apart. Mira wasn't just a liaison, she was a true partner, someone who understood the unspoken dynamics that could make or break a deal. One afternoon, during a tense negotiation with a German client, Mira's ability to diffuse a potentially explosive situation with a simple, culturally sensitive remark won her the respect of the entire room. The client, who had initially been distant and skeptical, warmed to her instantly. It wasn't just her fluency in German that impressed them, it was her genuine understanding of their concerns and her ability to navigate the conversation with grace. The deal was signed shortly after, and the client sent a personal note to Marcus, praising Mira as one of the best cultural liaisons they had ever worked with. As the weeks passed, Mira's reputation grew within the company and beyond. Her work was no longer just about language, it was about connection. She became a trusted voice not only in negotiations, but also in strategic planning sessions, where her insights into global markets and cultural dynamics helped shape the company's expansion strategies. Her opinions were sought after by leadership, and her ability to speak truthfully and authentically made her a voice of reason in the boardroom. Mira's rise wasn't without its challenges. She still faced the occasional whisper in the hallway, the sideways glance, the doubt. But each time, her work spoke louder than any criticism. She wasn't just doing the job, she was transforming it. And the respect she earned, not only from global partners, but from her colleagues, was a testament to her authenticity. By now, Mira had become more than just a key player at global tech. She had become a symbol, a living, breathing example of how recognizing untapped potential could reshape the future of a company. And as the company's culture slowly but surely began to embrace a more inclusive and holistic approach to leadership, Mira's presence was a constant reminder of what could be achieved when talent was given the chance to shine, no matter where it came from. Her ability to connect, not just in words, but in understanding, had transformed global tech's international dealings and had set a new standard for leadership within the company. It wasn't just her linguistic skills that earned her respect. It was her ability to see people for who they truly were and to make them feel valued. And in the quiet moments, when Mira sat at her desk or passed by the conference room that now bore her name, she allowed herself a small, private smile. This wasn't just her victory, it was a victory for everyone who had ever been overlooked or underestimated, proving that the path to success wasn't always straight or conventional. Sometimes it was about finding the strength to rewrite the rules and build something far greater than anyone had imagined. Despite Mira's growing influence and success, not everyone in the company was ready to embrace the changes she represented. The whispers in the hallway, the sideways glances, they hadn't entirely gone away. Some still found it hard to reconcile Mira's humble beginnings with her new high-level role. Among the skeptics was Victoria Crane, a senior executive who had been with global tech for over 2 decades. Victoria was a force to be reckoned with, sharp, driven, and deeply entrenched in the company's traditional ways of thinking. She had risen through the ranks the old-fashioned way, and Mira's swift ascent seemed to threaten everything she had worked for. One chilly morning, Marcus had asked Mira to meet with Victoria regarding some upcoming projects. It was a routine meeting, or so Mira thought, but she quickly realized it wasn't going to be just about business. As she entered Victoria's office, she noticed the cold, calculated way the senior executive looked at her. There was no warm welcome, no small talk. Instead, Victoria's gaze was sharp, appraising, and full of suspicion. "Miss Ellis," Victoria began, her voice clipped, "I've been reviewing your work and I have to admit I'm concerned. You've been given a position that most people in this company would spend years working toward, yet you have no formal qualifications in leadership, no corporate training. How do you justify your role here, especially given your background?" Mira felt a knot form in her stomach, but she remained calm. She had heard this before, both in hushed whispers and in quiet looks. She knew that people like Victoria, who had followed the traditional path, found it hard to understand how someone like her, with no formal credentials, could suddenly be leading high-profile negotiations and influencing major decisions. Mira met Victoria's gaze, steady and unwavering. "I justify it by results," she replied. Her voice was calm but firm, each word carrying the weight of her experience. "I've negotiated contracts worth millions. I've helped build relationships with clients in 5 different countries. I speak 9 languages fluently and understand the cultural nuances that others miss. I've connected with our international partners in a way that drives growth for the company, and I did it without needing a degree to prove my worth." Victoria's expression didn't soften, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's impressive, but results aren't everything. We're running a company, not a charity. There's a risk here, Mira. Your promotion bypassed so many more qualified people. It's unconventional." Mira held her ground, her posture straight, her voice calm. "I understand your concerns. I'm sure it's unsettling for some. But I've never needed the traditional path to prove what I'm capable of. I've been doing this job long before I ever wore this title, and I don't plan on backing down now." Victoria didn't seem convinced, her lips tightening into a thin line. "You're a risk," she stated bluntly, "and right now there's a lot of people questioning whether your unconventional rise is worth the potential fallout." Mira took a deep breath, but her resolve was unshaken. She knew resistance would come with the territory, especially in a company as steeped in tradition as global tech. But she wasn't new to challenges. She had faced them every day of her life, from growing up in a working-class family to fighting for every opportunity she had ever gotten. Mira didn't see this as a roadblock. She saw it as another moment to prove herself. "Risk or not," she replied, her voice gaining strength with each word, "I've already delivered. I've fixed communication breakdowns, sealed deals that others couldn't, and helped steer this company into new markets. What I don't have in traditional qualifications, I make up for with results, and I've earned my place here." Victoria stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to find a crack in her confidence. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but still laced with resistance. "We'll see, won't we, if your methods really work in the long run?" Mira nodded, acknowledging the challenge, but she wasn't backing down. "You're welcome to keep watching. I'm here to stay." As Mira left the room, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be people like Victoria who saw her as a threat to the established order. But Mira had never been afraid of hard work or adversity. She had been underestimated before, and it had only made her more determined. She wasn't going anywhere, and as long as she kept proving her worth, one result at a time, she knew she would silence the doubters. Because the truth was clear, Mira Ellis was no risk. She was a game changer. The months following her confrontation with Victoria passed in a blur of meetings, international communications, and new challenges. Mira refused to let the resistance she faced deter her. Every day she dove into her work with a quiet determination, fully committed to proving that she wasn't just a temporary solution or an anomaly within the company. She was there to stay, and she would prove her worth not just through words, but through action. Mira took an active role in every major negotiation and high-level project that came her way. She engaged fully with the international teams, always seeking to streamline processes, bridge cultural gaps, and offer insights that no one else could. Whether it was leading a discussion with a group of French executives or mediating between partners in South Africa and South Korea, Mira was a calming and effective force. She had already proven her linguistic abilities, but it was her cultural intelligence, her ability to navigate the subtle differences between business customs, that truly set her apart. In meetings, Mira was no longer the quiet observer. She took the floor confidently, offering solutions, asking questions, and challenging assumptions when necessary. Her presence became a powerful force, one that people began to respect, even if they didn't fully understand how she had come to be where she was. Her colleagues, who had once been skeptical, slowly began to see her as an invaluable asset. She was the bridge between the company and the rest of the world, a translator not just of words, but of ideas, cultures, and opportunities. It wasn't just in meetings where Mira's influence grew. As her impact on global tech's international relationships became undeniable, small notes of appreciation started to trickle in from her colleagues. Some were formal, sent via email, expressing gratitude for her help in a difficult negotiation or for stepping in at the last minute during a crisis. Others were more personal, small, sticky notes left on her desk, reading things like, "Thanks for helping me with that presentation, Mira. I never would have pulled it off without your insight," or "I don't know how you do it, but you've saved our deal with India." Each note, each quiet acknowledgement fueled her resolve. Mira didn't need loud cheers or grand recognition. She didn't need anyone to tell her she belonged. The work itself spoke volumes, but these small moments, the quiet nods of respect, reassured her that her influence was growing not just in the boardrooms, but among her peers. In addition to excelling in her role, Mira began to mentor others, offering guidance to colleagues who sought her advice. She saw in them the same potential she had once kept hidden, and she knew that fostering that talent was just as important as proving her own. She shared her approach to learning languages, her strategies for managing cultural differences, and her philosophy of lifelong learning. She encouraged others, especially those in non-traditional roles, to believe in their own potential and to never shy away from opportunities simply because they didn't fit the conventional mold. One afternoon, a young intern named Samara approached her after a meeting, looking nervous but determined. "Mira," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how language isn't just about words, it's about connection. But I don't speak any other languages. I've always thought that meant I'd never be able to move up here." Mira smiled warmly, placing a hand on the intern's shoulder. "Samara, you don't need to speak 9 languages to make a difference. You just need to be open to learning and connecting with people. Start with 1 word at a time. Build relationships. Understand people's stories. That's the real power behind language. And trust me, the world needs more of that." Samara left the conversation with newfound confidence, a small smile on her face, and a sense of direction that Mira had given her. It was these moments, these small, quiet exchanges, that Mira valued the most. She wasn't just changing the company's approach to global business. She was helping to change the way people saw themselves. As Mira continued to break down barriers and build bridges, her influence at global tech grew even stronger. She wasn't just a liaison anymore. She was a mentor, a leader, and a symbol of what was possible when talent, resilience, and opportunity aligned. The company was transforming before her eyes, and Mira knew that the journey was far from over. She wasn't just leaving her mark on global tech, she was setting a new standard, one where anyone, regardless of their background or title, could step into their greatness. And as Mira stood in her office, looking out over the city, she realized that the work was just beginning. The world was full of untapped talent, and it was time to help others see it, just as she had been seen. As Mira's impact continued to reverberate through the company, Marcus began to see a bigger picture, one that extended beyond just her role. Mira had proven that talent could be found in unexpected places, and he realized that global tech was sitting on a goldmine of untapped potential within its ranks. While many employees had been overlooked or passed over for advancement due to their unconventional paths, Mira's story had shown that real value often lay outside the traditional corporate ladder. Inspired by Mira's journey and the success she had brought to the company, Marcus knew it was time for global tech to take action. The more they discussed, the clearer it became. The company needed a formal initiative to uncover and nurture the overlooked talent within. And it wasn't just about recognizing potential. It was about providing the tools, the visibility, and the support to help these individuals thrive. Together, Marcus and Mira launched Voices Unheard, a program designed to identify, develop, and empower employees from non-traditional backgrounds. It was a bold step forward, an initiative that aimed to break down the barriers of corporate culture and challenge long-standing assumptions about what success should look like. Mira, with her own experience as living proof of the program's potential, became the face of the initiative. Voices Unheard wasn't just about giving employees a chance to speak up. It was about listening to the stories of those who had been sidelined or underestimated. The program offered language training, leadership coaching, and most importantly, increased visibility for employees who had the talent but had never been given the platform to showcase it. Mira and Marcus believed that by investing in these individuals, the company would not only change their lives, but transform its own culture and performance in the process. The initiative kicked off with a series of workshops, led by Mira and other senior leaders, focusing on leadership development and communication skills. Mira, having been through the system, knew exactly what was needed to help these employees succeed. She shared her own approach to learning and growing, teaching others how to build confidence, break through personal barriers, and step into leadership roles, even when they felt unqualified. One of the first employees to join the program was Theo, a mid-level technician who had worked at Global Tech for years but had never been given a chance to move up. His background in engineering was extensive, but his lack of formal business training had always held him back. Mira worked closely with him, helping him hone his presentation skills, providing feedback on his communication, and helping him navigate the cultural nuances of leadership. Another participant was Tasha, a customer service representative who had been with the company for over a decade. Despite her deep understanding of the product and her rapport with clients, she had never been considered for a higher role. Through Voices Unheard, Tasha gained confidence and the tools she needed to manage a team. With Mira's guidance, she learned how to lead with empathy, develop strategic thinking, and communicate effectively in larger meetings. As the program grew, so did its impact. Employees who had once felt invisible began to rise through the ranks, their talent finally recognized and nurtured. They were given opportunities to lead projects, represent the company in meetings, and contribute to decision-making in ways they had never imagined. Mira's story became the cornerstone of this transformation, a powerful catalyst for change that sparked a larger movement within the company. She had proven that with the right support, anyone could step into their greatness. It wasn't about titles or pedigree, it was about dedication, resilience, and the willingness to grow. Mira had built her own success on those principles, and now, through Voices Unheard, she was helping others do the same. In time, the program became a defining feature of Global Tech's culture. What had started as a small initiative grew into a company-wide movement, one that redefined what it meant to be successful at Global Tech. The company, once focused solely on external recruitment and traditional credentials, began to shift its focus inward, realizing that its most valuable resource wasn't just found outside, it was in the diverse, untapped potential within its own walls. For Mira, the initiative was more than just a program, it was a legacy. It was a way for her to ensure that no one else had to struggle in the shadows the way she once had. As she watched employees from all backgrounds flourish, taking on leadership roles and making their mark, Mira knew this was the beginning of something much bigger than herself. She had not only changed her own life, but she had helped change the culture of an entire company, creating a space where talent could truly thrive, no matter where it came from. Months passed, and Mira's transformation from janitor to global communications liaison had become the talk of the industry. Her success had not only changed the trajectory of her own life, but had reshaped the culture at Global Tech, making it a company that valued hidden potential and diverse paths to success. Her story was now one that had caught the attention of leaders outside of Global Tech, and soon she was invited to speak at a major leadership summit in Cincinnati, an event attended by top executives from companies across the globe. As Mira stood backstage, preparing to speak in front of an audience of influential leaders, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From cleaning floors in silence to standing in front of hundreds of people, her journey had been anything but conventional. But she had never been afraid of the unknown, never shied away from the hard work it took to rise from the background to the forefront. She had done it by staying true to herself, and that was something no title could ever take away. When Mira stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell into a hushed silence. The bright lights of the auditorium seemed to momentarily blind her, but as she looked out over the sea of faces, she felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over her. This wasn't just about her success. This was about making sure others who had been overlooked, just like she had once been, knew they too could rise. She began her speech with a simple but powerful statement. I was a janitor at Global Tech, and if someone had told me that one day I would stand here, I wouldn't have believed them. The audience was still, hanging on her every word. I didn't have a degree in business or international relations, Mira continued. I wasn't hired because of a polished resume or because I fit into the traditional mold of what success looks like in the corporate world. I was hired because I was a hard worker and I kept learning. I kept pushing myself to do more, to understand more. I spoke languages, but more than that, I learned the value of connecting with people. I learned that talent and intelligence don't wear a uniform, and they certainly don't need a fancy title to be recognized. Her voice grew steadier with each word. The world tends to overlook those of us who don't fit into neat little boxes, but that doesn't mean we aren't capable of greatness. I stand here today not because of luck, but because I kept going, because I was seen by someone who was willing to look beyond my uniform. My journey is proof that we must never ignore the potential that lies in unexpected places. Mira paused. For a moment, her eyes scanning the audience. Leaders, I urge you, look for the brilliance that's hiding in plain sight. Look for it in those who might not have the perfect resume, in those who don't fit the mold, and in those who might not even be seen at all. We need to create opportunities for those who have been waiting in the wings, believing they aren't worthy of the stage, because they are. They always have been. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling in. Mira's story had resonated deeply with the audience, and she could see it in the faces of the executives sitting in front of her. There were nods of understanding, some even taking notes. For the first time, it seemed that her message was breaking through, touching something inside them that perhaps they hadn't recognized before. Her closing message was clear, strong, and unequivocal. Talent and intelligence wear no uniform. They come in all shapes, all backgrounds, and all walks of life. We must stop waiting for it to show up in the places we expect and start looking for it where it's often missed. As Mira finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. But as she stepped off the stage, it wasn't the applause that filled her with pride. It was the knowledge that she had shared her truth, her journey, and in doing so, had encouraged others to see value where it had been overlooked. She had inspired people to rethink what success really meant, and to understand that greatness could come from anywhere, even from places the world had long forgotten to look. As she walked off the stage, Mira didn't feel taller because of the accolades or the title she had earned. She walked taller because she had never lost herself on the path. She had stayed true to who she was, and in doing so had carved out a space where people could see her, truly see her, for the first time. This was her legacy, not the titles she had earned, but the way she had changed the way others saw talent, potential, and opportunity. It was a legacy that would live on in the stories of the people who would follow in her footsteps, the people she had inspired to believe in their own brilliance, no matter where they came from. And as Mira left the stage that day, she knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would change the world, one overlooked person at a time.